Hello friends, I'm here once again painting Marvel Crisis Protocol, and this time we are gonna paint Loki, the god of mischief. We are gonna start by priming the miniature with black spray paint. And right after that I'm gonna start base coating every single thing that you see, starting with the icicles. I am using this really nice icy blue, and honestly you will need more than one layer, so just be prepared for that. Once I got some nice coverage, I went ahead and base coated his pants. Maybe you cannot really distinguish between black and this paint, but honestly it's gonna be really different. As you will see me do, we will paint nice gradient on the pants, so it is really necessary to progress slowly here. His iconic green coat is gonna be painted with this green color, and honestly you can pick whatever you want. I would go for some vibrant green. As always, when base coating, it might take you more than one layer. Now around his neck there are these two little green pieces and you want to cover them too. So that's what I did, quite slowly, and just got there a nice coverage. And once you got that, we will cover all of the golden and leathery parts, except for the belt. So just spread it all over his boots. Just take your time, you don't want to stain the blue or the pants. I'm gonna use the same mix for the stuff and all of the golden pieces. Just get that nice coverage, make sure it's smooth. Of course, cover even these little golden pieces. If you mess up along the way, at this point you can just cover that mistake, it's no biggie. But maybe if you take your time and do it slowly without any mistake, it will be faster. So just spread it on there really carefully. Now I'm covering his helmet, or rather crown, and of course these little pieces on his jacket. So just make sure that you don't miss any spot. Now I'm gonna base coat his scale armor. I'm gonna use dark sea blue here, and since I'm not gonna use any metallic paint, dark sea blue is excellent for non-metallic metal. You wanna cover all of the scale armor, fix any mistakes that you make along the way. And now with flat brown I'm gonna cover his belt. Now you will really see the importance of really tiny brushes. You really need to be careful and really precise. Oh, and by the way, many people always ask me in the comment section which brushes do I use. So I would recommend just two brands. The first one is DaVinci Maestro, and I use sizes 000, 00, and 1. And the other brand is Winsor & Newton Series 7. Now I haven't tried Winsor & Newton yet, but I know that many painters are recommending it. And I know that this stuff is a little bit expensive, but believe me that this is definitely absolutely worth it. Now with intermediate blue I'm gonna cover his belt buckle. You don't want to stain the brown that you have already painted, but if you do, you can just fix it. With Mechanicus standard gray I'm gonna paint the fur. If you wanna use different gray, that's completely fine, but I would recommend using some darker gray. With the fur base coated I'm gonna cover all of the flesh. So that is his neck, his face, and of course his fingers. Use any kind of pinkish flesh tone that you have. And lastly, these gloves and his hair is gonna be covered with black. Of course, you might say that the whole miniature was covered in black when priming, but it's different kind of black than Abaddon black. We are gonna start shading the eyes. For that, I'm mixing this really nice purple with this ultramarine blue. Make sure that you cover all of the eyes. You don't want to leave any recess unwashed. It also might be that you wanna add some more later, so do that if you feel like it's not washed enough. I'm coming back to this really nice icy blue, and I will start with the first highlight. You wanna cover most of the separate icicles because at this point the paint is not bright enough. So just do that, as you can see here. Pick every single icicle that is exposed to light. Since you will pick out every single icicle one at a time, it might take you a while. And it's time to add white to your Lothern blue. And with this you wanna push the paint just to the top half of the icicle. As you will add more and more white, you will need to cover less and less surface. So essentially you wanna edge highlight every single icicle still, but less surface of it. Alright, so that is a really nice coverage, and you can see that on my wet palette I'm actually creating this spectrum from which I pick more and more layers. As I approach the final layer, I will use this stippling motion to really control the paint. So you can do that, it will even add a nice frozen effect. At this point maybe just top 50% of the icicles is gonna be covered. Alright, and honestly the ice is pretty much finished. Or at least I'm happy with it. To continue on the pants, I'm gonna pick pure Incubi Darkness. This time I will cover just about 80% of the whole pants. Progressively I will add Avery to my Incubi Darkness. At first it might not seem like a significant highlight, but believe me, you wanna take it slowly. Definitely add more lighter layers on more exposed parts. That means mainly his thighs, knees, and his man bulge. And on the knees, I'm just sketching few lines here and there. Once again, you can see me use this stippling motion and it really helps me blend the layers between each other. Just like this, you will add more and more lighter layers on top of each other. And pretty much you will progress like this on the same places, so his knees, thighs, and his little Loki. Now if stippling doesn't exactly fit you, you can definitely use little lines here and there. I'm pretty much just highlighting every edge that I can see on his pants, and you wanna do the same. There's also a little reflection on his thigh, so definitely stipple it on there. And you can really see that stippling motion really helps us blend the paints. Remember to highlight the knees. And after that I'm adding last highlight. Now you might ask, okay, but what's the ratio between the paints? Well, honestly, I don't know. You just have to feel it yourself. If you feel like the pants are bright enough already, you can definitely stop, but I feel that I can push it a little bit further. Like this, I'm stippling on last layer and that's gonna be it. So this is what I'm satisfied with, but definitely do some blacklining. And what I mean by that is that you wanna create shadows and separations between each body part. In this case, I will create small black line between his little Loki and his leg. I definitely feel like when you are painting comic book heroes, it's necessary to blackline them. Because in the comics, that's what they look like. Every single part is well separated. And this is it for the pants. I'm gonna use these paints to finish his belt buckle and belt. You can see that I'm creating a spectrum on my wet palette, and it's totally necessary when I'm painting non-metallic metal. And I will try to create here a contrast and blend it between the layers. Unfortunately, the shot here is a little bit blurry. I suspect that this is because Loki is such a handsome man and the camera couldn't really focus. Anyway, I am pushing the brighter paint to the top where the light hits the most. And at the bottom part of the belt buckle is a little bit darker layer. Now the key here, as with all non-metallic metal, is blending. You definitely want to create a smooth gradient here. After going back and forth between layers, I decided to finish up the belt buckle with edge highlight. Now for the belt itself, pretty much all I am doing is highlighting the edges and adding scratches here and there. You can notice that I am using for most of my highlights ivory, and that is because it's basically white with a little tiny bit of yellow in it. That makes it perfect ingredient to your base paint to make them highlight colors. And since there is not that much yellow, it makes it a little bit desaturated, which works out perfectly for the belt. I am doing here a mistake that I am making the highlights too bright, and in that case just go back to your flat brown and darken it a little bit. Now it's time to paint the scale armor. Basically I am using just white and dark sea blue. And once again I am creating a spectrum of colors from these two base paints. From this I will do all of the scale armor. There are two ways to paint non-metallic metal. The first one is that you start really dark and then build up your layers to make it really bright. And the second one is that you start actually really bright and then blend the rest of it. In this case I'm first painting the brightest parts of the scale armor. At the same time leave the recesses shaded because it makes sense for the shade to be there. Once I build the main reflection, I start building up those midtones. Basically you wanna go a little bit darker, but it shouldn't be really noticeable. Like this you will go darker and darker and darker. But still keep in mind that overall it should be really bright. Maybe leave pure dark sea blue just at the recesses of the whole piece. Pretty much I'm doing the same thing over and over again over the whole scale armor. I'm starting with the really bright reflections in the middle and then I'm slowly building up those midtones. If you are not sure where the reflections should be, just put your model against the light and it should be quite obvious. What you can see now is the progress after putting down 2 layers of midtones. Now I just continue building up those midtones and here I am almost finished. I am just making some of the middle reflections even brighter. And if you are not sure if the reflection is bright enough or not, you can just add white as you please. And to finish up the scale armor, I will shade the recesses with pure black. Of course, don't forget about every single piece that has scales on it, but pretty much it's the same process. It's time to paint his boots. I'm using Rhinox hide and I will water it down super heavily so it's really almost a wash. And with this I will cover entirety of both boots. Especially put emphasis on those recesses. All I will do now is use these 2 paints. Once again I will use this stippling motion to create sort of a texture on the boot. And I will just slowly highlight it towards the edges. Stippling and leather is perfect combination since it creates this sort of used texture. As always you can add more and more white as you go along the way. And the more white you add, the more you want to focus on those edges. If you make a mistake of making it too bright, you can go ahead and wash it one more time with Rhinoxide. After doing that, I picked once again US Field Drab and white and highlighted the edges. I also added here and there some random scratches. Now, since every scratch needs some sort of a recess, I went ahead and used black for it. I pretty much just copied the bright line and sketched out the black line under it. Alright, so this is pretty much it for the boot, really scratched and textured, which is what I like. And now I'm finishing it up with black lines. Be careful to apply it just in the recesses to separate the plate and the boot. Finally, it's time to paint non-metallic metal gold. This time I will mainly use yellow ochre and US Field Drab combined with white. I have decided to use the same approach and first sketch out the brightest parts. So pretty much everywhere you wanna sketch out the brightest layers and then sort of connect it with the rest. Don't worry if you don't get it now, I will show you later how to do it in the full detail. Just know that you wanna once again create a spectrum on your wet palette. Your main paint here is yellow ochre and you wanna combine it with white for lighter layers and with US Field Drab for the darker ones. This is what the end result looks like. You can see that it's blended quite nicely. And now I will demonstrate the whole process on his boot plates. I'm once again starting off with the main bright reflections. You wanna make them quite large and long, you know, the size matters. And once they are long and stretched enough, you wanna blend them in with the rest. One of the key points here is to put the reflection where it makes sense. And for that you can just follow me and see where I put it. I'm doing pretty much the same on the other boot. Once again putting that large, long reflection in the middle. Make sure that it's well saturated and well covered. You don't want to see any brown under this layer. When you feel like it's saturated enough, it's time to put down some midtones. The brightest part of the reflection is about 80% white and the rest is yellow. The midtone, however, is about 60% white and the rest is yellow. Like this, you wanna put this layer around all the sides of the reflection. If the gradient here is not smooth enough yet, don't worry, we will do that later. Now I'm adding yet another midtone and this time I'm adding even a little bit of US Field Drab. Honestly, I don't have the exact ratio in my mind, but the only thing necessary that you need to know is that we will blend it anyway later. So even if it still seems like it's a little bit drastic and not smooth enough, we will just fix that, no worries. Just a quick note here, because this is super necessary for you to understand. So basically we have used like 3 layers, and that is the main reflection, first midtone and the third midtone. And for these layers you always want to create another midtone that you will put just in the transition. So for example, you have your reflection and you have your first midtone. You want to combine these two, create another midtone, and you will put this one in between the transition between these two. And the same goes for the 2 midtones. So you have your first midtone that is right next to the reflection, and the second midtone that is pretty much just next to this midtone. You want to combine these two, create another midtone, and once again put it just in the transition between these two. This will unite all of the layers and it should make the gradient really smooth. So as I already mentioned, you want to pick a midtone of the midtone and the brightest layer. And with this new shade you want to cover just the transition between the 2 layers. And this pretty much applies for all of the reflections. You always want to smoothen out the gradient between them, and for that you need another midtone. And with this new midtone you want to cover just the transition between the 2 layers. You want to just really slightly cover this transition, just barely touch the surface. You can even sort of just glaze over it and just make sure that it's barely visible. Once you have blended all of the layers, you want to highlight the hell out of it. Especially put emphasis on all of the top edges, because after all, those are the parts that are the most exposed to light. Once again, you can see me smoothen out the gradient here. You can see that I'm barely touching the surface of this plate. And this is pretty much the basis of the boot plates. At this point I am still not definitely happy with it, and I will decide to add more reflections later. There will be 2 more reflections on this boot plate. I will have to proceed here really slowly since I have to gradually build it up. I have added even a reflection on the other boot plate, and I moved on to the other pieces. To be quite frank, from this point on it's the same story over and over again. It's about making a well saturated reflection in the middle, putting down some midtones around it, on top of that mix in some darker layers, and once it's blended well enough you wanna edge highlight it. But keep in mind with all of the golden pieces that you want to separate them from the rest of the miniature by blacklining them. At this point I think that I can speed up the footage since it's the same process over and over again. So just to remind you, you first have to pick some spots where the reflections will be. Once you have picked these spots, paint bright reflections on them. Make sure that this reflection is very nicely saturated and that no underneath layer is visible. Once you got it, you will add more midtones next to it. Once you have painted all of the midtones, you wanna blend them between each other. For this, pick each shade and mix them between each other and put it down just on the transition. Smoothen out the gradient really lightly between the layers, just so it is barely visible. Remember that the more midtones you will have, the smoother the gradient will be. Once you get it, you will have to edge highlight every single golden piece and of course, blackline it. By the way, for blacklining of a gold piece that is right next to another gold piece, I use Rhinox hide. So like this I will progress on, and since it's the same stuff over and over again, I will just speed up the footage and see you in a minute. So that's it for all of the golden pieces except for the crown. And that is because I prefer to first paint the hair and the face. For the sweet glow effect on the orb, I will first paint it with pure white. This will definitely take you more than one layers, just be patient here. Once it is nicely covered, I will use pure livery green to create this glow. You wanna water it down super heavily and push the paint from the middle out. Usually you wanna avoid the recesses, but this time definitely fill them with paint. You also wanna leave the white in the middle since that is gonna be our source of the light. As such, it should be the brightest point. I think that livery green works out very nicely since it's a paint with a lot of yellow in it. Remember that when you want to make the paint really bright, you need to add yellow instead of white. White will make it just desaturated, and in this case you don't want that. And if you feel like you covered too much of the middle with livery green, go ahead and take the white again. You can see me push the paint into the recesses, so that's what you wanna do too. Really just make sure that those recesses are filled with paint. And also you can paint even nearby edges with livery green. After all, when it glows, it should make some reflections. And that's gonna be it. For the face, I will pick dark brown and wash the whole thing. Notice that I'm not using Agrax Earthshade or any sort of dedicated wash since I don't want it to be too thick. If you want to learn how to paint the whole face, I have a dedicated video just for that, and there is gonna be a link in the top right corner. But basically I am mostly using scale 75 paints. All I am doing is that I am picking out all elevated areas and highlighting them. So I will add more and more lighter layers as I go along the way. And of course this applies for his neck too, and even his fingers. So I'm adding more and more layers as I already mentioned, focusing mainly on his nose, cheeks, lips and chin. Notice that I'm still leaving some wash in the recesses. After putting down the lightest layer, I have used black to blackline around his helmet. This will create a nice separation between these two pieces. For the eyes, you have to be actually really careful. You have to really focus. You have to basically just paint little black dot at the center of the eye. Now at the center of this black dot, you wanna paint a white dot. And on this white dot, you wanna paint the pupil. After going back and forth for a little bit, this is what I got. It took me some fixing here and there, but it's definitely worth it. To highlight the hair, I will pick this blue and combine it with black. I am using here this sort of soft dry brush motion. That way I don't feel like I can overdo it. But definitely in this case, less is more. Since I felt like the hair is highlighted too intensely, I decided to water down black and wash over it. At the same time, since I was already using black, I decided to blackline the rest of the pieces. And that goes mainly for the separation of the fur, coat and the golden pieces. I would recommend being super careful around the gold, since if you mess up now, you will have to fix it and that's gonna take you some time. Now with these two paints combined, I will highlight the fur. Whenever I am painting something like fur, I sort of dry brush it and that's it. That way the recesses will still be sort of shaded and that's what you want. Now I know it's not exactly dry brushing, but it's sort of a stippling motion, I guess. I am adding Ulthuan Grey to my existing mix and this will make another layer. This time I will apply it more sparingly. Okay, now I'm back to painting gold again, and this time it's gonna be just the crown. Once again, I'm sketching out where the reflections are gonna be. Once I know where it is, I will work on making those reflections very saturated. Now I'm putting down some midtones here. Of course, I'm connecting those to the base reflections. And now I'm applying the last midtone. And the last thing that you have to do is edge highlight every single edge of the crown and blend the midtones. So that's what I worked on, and after a while, this is what I got. I will highlight the gloves with this gray, just go over edges and elevated areas, mainly put emphasis on the knuckles. Also, at this point I'm finishing up the fingers, and I am using layering in the same way that I did for the face. It's finally time to finish this miniature with the green coat. Since all around the green coat there are some imperfections here and there, and also there are some stains from the blacklining, just put there another layer of the same green paint. I will use these two bad boys to shade the coat. So I am not using dedicated wash, instead I am using these two paints, combining them together, watering them down a lot and putting it down on the recesses. If you feel like the coat is not shaded enough, just put there another layer. Once you got it, you wanna go back to your green base paint and go over the elevated areas. It doesn't really make sense for the wash to be everywhere. So as I said, pick all of the elevated parts and all of the edges, and leave the wash just in the places where it should be. So if you feel like any single part should be exposed to light, definitely highlight it with this green paint. I am adding a little bit of Vallejo light green, and I am once again highlighting all of the edges. Definitely put emphasis on the sleeves, since these are exposed to light the most. And that's the coat finished, so this is it for the miniature. Now all that is left to do is the base. Mandatory paint for this is Stonewall Grey. You wanna put down a nicely saturated layer on the base and make sure that no black is visible. So it might take you more than one layer, just be prepared for that. I will even add a little bit of ivory to make it more interesting, and I will add random stains here and there. Once I feel like it got nice coverage, I will take Noon Oil and water it down in 1:1 ratio. At this point it's watered down, so you can be quite generous, and definitely put emphasis on the recesses. Once again, it may take you a layer or two. I decided to test out these new brushes, and I will dry brush a little bit of the base paint on there. That means that I have picked my Stonewall Grey and basically just dry brushed every single thing. Like this, I have fixed even some irregular wash stains. I have came back to Noon Oil and washed just the recesses. Now I have picked pure ivory and highlighted every single edge here. And be careful around the recesses, since otherwise you will have to come back to Noon Oil. You can now either pick Rhinox hide or some kind of black or really dark brown and just add some random dots here and there. I have to be honest, I have stolen this trick from Sarastro, but basically I have glued on some random rocks here and there. I have actually placed the rock inside the glue and then put it on the base. I don't think that it's necessary to cover the whole base with the glue. And yeah, this is pretty much it. All that is left to do is to paint the trim of the base with black. Alright guys, so this is pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something new and you wanna see more, definitely subscribe to my channel. If you wanna help me out, definitely give this video a thumbs up, so that way other people will see it. And lastly, if you have any suggestion for the next topic, go ahead and leave it in the comment section. And see you guys in the next video. Bye!